A man who made mistakes lightly. 63 years of living had taught me to read people, to measure words before spending them, to trust slowly and carefully. I had built a lumber supply company from a single truck and a borrowed warehouse into something that employed 41 people and kept the lights on in half the construction projects across western Tennessee. I had raised a son. I had buried a wife. I had done everything a man is supposed to do. And still, I almost didn't see it coming. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a father, a widower, and for a period of about 14 months, I was a fool. Not the kind of fool who doesn't know better. The worst kind, the kind who does know better and chooses to believe anyway, because the alternative is too painful to look at directly. It started the way most disasters start, quietly, with something that looked like love. My son had been married for 3 years when he and his wife moved back to Clarksville. He told me it was because he missed home. He told me his wife, Rachel, wanted to be closer to family. He told me a lot of things. I believed most of them, because he was my son, and because I wanted to believe that I had raised someone worth believing in. His mother had died 6 years before, and grief has a way of making you hold tighter to whatever family you have left. They moved into the house on Birchwood Drive, about 12 minutes from mine. At first it was good. Sunday dinners, football games on the television. Rachel would bring over casseroles that she said she made from scratch, and I would eat them and tell her they were delicious, even when they weren't, because that is what you do. I was happy, or something close to it. My neighbor noticed before I did. Earl had lived next door to me for 22 years. He was 71, a retired mail carrier with a bad knee and an excellent memory for detail. His wife passed a few years after mine, and somewhere in that shared grief, we had become something more than neighbors. Not quite friends in the way younger men mean it, but the kind of companions who check on each other during ice storms and don't need to explain why. Earl didn't say anything at first. He told me later that he wasn't sure. He said he didn't want to be the kind of man who poisons a relationship over a feeling. But he was watching. Earl was always watching from that front porch of his, drinking his decaf and watching. The first sign I noticed myself was the fatigue. I had always been an early riser, up before 6, at the yard by 7, but sometime around March I started sleeping through my alarm. I would wake up disoriented, with a heaviness in my arms that took hours to lift. I told my doctor it was stress. He told me it was age. We were probably both wrong. The second sign was the paperwork. My son had started coming to the office more. At first I was glad. I had always hoped he would want to take over the business eventually, had hoped since he was a teenager, though he had never shown much interest. Suddenly he was interested. He wanted to understand the accounts, the contracts, the client relationships. He brought Rachel with him sometimes, and she would sit in the corner office with her laptop and smile at the right moments. I showed them everything. I was proud to show them everything. I thought this was what it looked like when a family comes together. It was Rachel who first mentioned the ownership transfer. She brought it up carefully, the way you introduce a needle so slowly you barely feel the point. She said she had been talking to an accountant friend, purely hypothetically, and that there might be significant tax advantages to transferring the business into my son's name before the end of the fiscal year. She used words like estate planning and generational wealth and what your wife would have wanted. I listened. I did not commit, but I listened. That conversation happened on a Thursday. The following Sunday, my son brought it up again over dinner more directly. He had numbers. He had documents. He had a recommendation for an attorney who could handle the transfer quickly and cleanly. He said he was doing this for me. He said he was worried about my health, that I was pushing myself too hard, that I deserved to rest. I told him I would think about it. Earl knocked on my door that Monday evening. He had a jar of his wife's old apple butter that he had found in the back of his pantry and wanted to give to me before it expired. That was the excuse. What he actually wanted to say took him about 15 minutes of small talk to get to. "George," he said, and I will use that name, close enough to the truth. "I need to ask you something, and I need you not to get angry before I finish." I told him to go ahead. "Have you been feeling all right lately? Physically, I mean." I told him about the fatigue, the heaviness, the way my thinking had felt slower than usual, like a radio signal with too much static. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How often does your daughter-in-law bring you things to eat or drink?" I told him she came by most days. She was thoughtful that way, I said. She brought coffee in the mornings sometimes, before the workday. Soup when she said I looked tired. I had thought it was kindness. Earl looked at me in a way I had not seen from him before, steady and serious and sad. "I saw something," he said, 3 weeks ago, I was on the porch, early, before you were up. Rachel came to your door with a thermos. She didn't knock right away. She stood at the bottom of your steps and took something from her coat pocket. A small bottle. She added something to the thermos. Then she knocked. The room got very still. I told myself I might have misread it, he said. The light wasn't great. I'm an old man. But then I started paying more attention. And George, I don't think I misread it. I did not sleep that night. I want to be honest about what happened inside me, in the hours after Earl told me what he saw. It was not anger, not at first. It was something closer to grief, the particular grief of watching something you loved reveal itself as something else entirely. My son, the boy I had coached through Little League and driven to college interviews and stood beside at his wedding. I sat in my kitchen until 4 a.m, and I went through every memory I had of him, looking for the place where I had gone wrong, or where he had, trying to understand how we had arrived here. I did not find an answer. I'm not sure there is one. What I did find, in the morning, was clarity. I called an attorney I had used for business matters for 15 years, a woman named Patricia who had never once told me what I wanted to hear and had therefore earned more of my trust than almost anyone. I told her everything. She told me to stop consuming anything brought by Rachel or my son until we knew more. She told me to see my doctor and ask specifically for a heavy metals panel and a toxicology screen. She told me not to confront anyone yet. The test results came back 8 days later. There was arsenic in my system. Not a lethal level, but consistent, my doctor said, with ongoing low-dose exposure over a period of weeks or months. He reported it, as he was required to do. The police became involved. I was asked to continue my normal routine while an investigation was conducted, which was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Sitting across from my son at dinner, watching Rachel pour coffee, saying thank you and meaning nothing. The attorney worked with the investigators. Earl gave a formal statement. They obtained a warrant and found, in the cabinet beneath Rachel's bathroom sink, a bottle of a pesticide compound with an unusually high arsenic content. They found search histories on her laptop going back 7 months. My son was arrested 14 days after I first sat in Earl's kitchen and heard what he had seen from his porch. The trial took 11 days. I sat in that courtroom and watched my son across the room and waited for him to look at me. He looked at his attorney. He looked at the jury. He looked at his hands. He did not look at me, not once, and I think that told me more than anything his attorney said. Rachel's attorney argued that the arsenic exposure was accidental, environmental, a quirk of the old pipes in my house. Patricia dismantled that argument methodically and without visible emotion, which is exactly what I was paying her to do. Earl testified. My doctor testified. The investigator who had cataloged Rachel's search history testified and read several of those searches aloud in the courtroom, and there was a silence in the room after each one that felt like a physical weight. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts for both of them. My son on conspiracy charges, Rachel on attempted murder and conspiracy. The sentences were handed down 6 weeks later. My son received 7 years. Rachel received 14. I stood outside the courthouse on a Thursday afternoon in November, and Patricia shook my hand, and the air was cold and smelled like rain, and I did not feel the way I had expected to feel. I had thought I would feel relief, or vindication, or perhaps the clean, sharp satisfaction of justice that people talk about. What I felt instead was tired, and very old, and very alone, in the particular way you feel alone when you realize that the people you were counting on to grow old alongside you are gone, one way or another. Earl was waiting for me in the parking lot. He had driven himself, which he wasn't supposed to do anymore on account of his knee and the reaction time issues his doctor had mentioned. He didn't say anything when I walked up. He just handed me a thermos of decaf coffee he had brought from home, and we stood there in the cold for a few minutes. And that was enough. I want to tell you about what happened next, because the trial is not the end of the story. It is not even close to the end. The business had to be untangled. My son had, in the months before his arrest, convinced me to sign several documents that I had believed were routine administrative updates. Patricia spent 4 months working through those documents with a forensic accountant. 2 of them had given my son partial signing authority over company accounts. A third had designated him as interim director in the event of my medical incapacitation, a phrase that took on a different meaning once we understood what kind of incapacitation had been planned. We reversed everything we could reverse. Some of it cost money. Some of it cost relationships with clients who had been confused by the conflicting paperwork. I lost one long-standing contract with a builder in Nashville who decided the whole situation was too complicated and moved his lumber business elsewhere. I didn't blame him. What I had left was smaller than what I'd had, but it was mine, clearly and entirely mine, and I understood its value differently now. Earl came to the office with me a few days a week that winter. He had nothing else to do, and I had more than I could manage alone. He answered phones and made coffee and talked to clients with the easy, unhurried manner of a man who has spent decades showing up at strangers' doors and making them feel like he had all the time in the world. Several clients told me he was the best thing about calling the office. I told him, and he laughed for about 30 seconds straight. I sold the big house in the spring. It had been my wife's choice, that house, the one she had put her hands on every room of, and after she died I had kept it out of loyalty to her memory. But memory is not a reason to stay somewhere that has become heavy. I bought a smaller place on the east side of Clarksville, 3 bedrooms, a yard that didn't require a riding mower, a porch that faced the sunset. Earl lives 4 streets away now. Close enough. I also did something I had not planned and could not entirely explain, even to Patricia, who thought it was admirable but impractical. I contacted a social worker I had met through the courthouse proceedings, a woman named Dr. Vinson, who worked with Adult Protective Services and had been quietly furious throughout the trial, in a way that I recognized and respected. I told her I wanted to do something. I told her I wasn't sure what. She told me what she needed. She needed funding for a program that specifically helped older adults in financial exploitation situations. Not just the criminal cases that made it to trial, but the quieter ones, the will changes, the forged signatures, the slow transfers of property that no one questions, because who questions a son helping his elderly father with paperwork? She had been trying to get this program funded for 3 years. She had grant applications pending with 2 organizations, and both were stalled. I funded the gap. Not the entirety of it, I am comfortable, but not wealthy in the way people imagine when they hear the word businessman, but enough to hire 2 full-time caseworkers and keep the program running through its first year, while the grant applications caught up. Dr. Vinson named it the Steady Ground Initiative, which I thought was a good name. Solid, practical, the kind of name my wife would have approved of. I check in on it quarterly. I sit in on the case review meetings when I can. I have heard stories in those meetings that make what happened to me seem minor by comparison, and I have heard stories that sound almost identical to mine, and in both cases I leave the meeting feeling that the money is going somewhere real. Earl attended the program's small opening reception with me. He wore a tie that I was fairly certain had not been worn since his wife's funeral, and he told everyone he met that the whole thing had started because he was a nosy neighbor with nothing better to do than sit on his porch and pay attention. People laughed. He meant it completely seriously. I want to say something to you if you are listening to this and you are older, and you have family around you who are paying a great deal of attention to what you own. Please hear me. Attention is not the same as love. Helpfulness is not the same as loyalty. A person can hand you coffee every morning and be doing it for reasons that have nothing to do with caring whether you wake up. The people who love you are not always the ones closest to you. Sometimes they are the ones on the edge, the ones who have nothing to gain. The ones who hesitate because they are afraid of being wrong but tell you anyway because the alternative is worse. Sometimes they are 71 years old with a bad knee and a porch and the simple, extraordinary habit of paying attention. I think about what would have happened if Earl had stayed quiet. He almost did. He told me he stood at my door for 10 minutes that Monday evening before he knocked, talking himself into and out of it several times. He was afraid I wouldn't believe him. He was afraid I would be angry. He was afraid of being wrong. He knocked anyway. I do not know what my son became, or when, or why. I have thought about it more times than I can count. Turned it over like a stone you can't stop picking up even though you know there's nothing under it. I don't think he was always this. I think something in him saw an opportunity and chose it, and that choice made the next choice easier, and then the next, until he was a man who could sit across a dinner table from his father and watch him getting slowly sick and say nothing except pass the bread. I don't know if I will ever speak to him again. He has not reached out. I am not sure I would want him to. There are some doors, once you understand what was on the other side, that you don't need to open again. What I know is this. I am still here. I run a smaller company than I used to, and I work fewer hours, and I have a porch that faces the sunset, and on most evenings Earl comes over, or I go to him, and we drink decaf coffee, always decaf now, always from my own kitchen, always poured with my own hands, and we watch the light change over the rooftops, and we don't have to explain anything to each other. That is not nothing. In fact, I have come to understand it as something very close to everything. If you are watching this from somewhere far away, I hope you have someone like Earl in your life. I hope you have the sense to let them knock. and I hope that whatever you are carrying tonight feels a little lighter by the time you reach the end of it. It does get lighter, I promise you that. Not all at once, and not without cost, but it gets lighter. To justice, and to the quiet, stubborn people who make it possible.